Hare Krishna, everyone. Welcome back to the daily readings of Srila Prabhupada's books, in which we get an opportunity to associate with the liberated soul. Srila Prabhupada came to this country when he was 70 years old. First time out of India. Anybody been to India? Culture shock must have been the cultural hurdles that he had to cross over in order to do what he did in 12 years, including, translate and comment on Bhagavatam, Chaitanya Charitamrita, and so many other books, close to 80 books, all after he was 70 years old. Never been done before, and it'll never be done again. One of those things that can only be done once, right? So that's the level of person we get to associate with when we read these books. And when we do it together, it just expands and amplifies that fact in our hearts. So we have new people and if I try to say those names again, I'll embarrass you and me. So I'll just say welcome again. Hare Krishna. And so let's go. We're going to read a prayer that glorifies the book that we're reading by one of the great liberated associates of Lord Chaitanya, who came here 500 years ago to this world and brought the holy name, the offenseless holy name, and his perfect example, Krishna himself acting as a devotee of himself to show us how to be perfect devotees. So this is called Srimad-Bhagavatam Mahima Stotram, and it explains what the book is that we're going to be reading right now. It goes like this. Sarva Shastra Vipiyusha Sarva Vedaika Satpala Sarva Siddhanta Ratnaja Sarva Lokaika Drikprada. O nectar from the ocean of all scripture, superfruit of all the Vedas, rich mine of the precious gems of all conclusive truths, you are the only giver of sight to all the worlds. Sarva Bhagavata Prana Srimad-Bhagavata Prabho Kalidvan Dotita Ditya Shri Krishna Parivartita. O life air of all the Supreme Lord's devotees, O Master Srimad-Bhagavatam, you are the sun risen in the darkness of Kali. You are the exact image of Sri Krishna. Paramananda Padaya Prema Varshaksharayate Sarvada Sarvasevyaya Shri Krishnaya Namostume. I bow down to you, who are supremely blissful to read. Your every syllable pours down a flood of prema. You can always be served by everyone. You are Sri Krishna himself. Marika Bando Matsangin Madmadho Madgahadana Mandisadagamad Bhagya Mad Ananda Namostute. My only friend, my constant companion, my spiritual master, my great wealth, my savior, my good fortune, my source of ecstasy, I bow down to you. Asadu saduta dayin atini chochata kada hanamun jagadachin mam premna rit kantayospuda. O bestower of saintliness to the unsaintly, O exalter of the most fallen, please never leave me. Always appear in my heart and my voice with pure love. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 So we're continuing on the 4th canto out of 12, 28th chapter, text number 43. So what's happening is that Narada Muni practically the spiritual master of the whole universe is teaching a king who became too attached. Kings tend to get too attached. That's the nature of being a king. And he became too attached, and he was misbehaving and doing so many things and neglecting his queen. You know what happens when you neglect the queen? She gets upset. So then what happened was, so he's telling this story to this king, Prachinabarishat, so that he will wake up and realize that the way he's acting and the way he's living is not correct spiritually. So in the process of telling him that story to the king, he made up an allegory, an allegorical story about a king named Puranjana, who was actually the real king he's speaking to. And what happened was, this Puranjana, first of all, he had a very heavy experience at death, and then he took the body of a queen because he had his mind on the queen all the time. That's what happens. What you're thinking of at the time of death, that's where you go. So now she's married a king because he did some pious activity as well as the nonsense. So that's the way we all are. You know, we've done some pious activity, therefore we're here devotees. We've done some nonsense, and therefore it's difficult for us sometimes. Hare Krishna. So we're continuing with the allegorical story, and this Puranjana, who is now the queen of the king of Vidarbha, is being discussed. Hare Krishna, you must be Gadima. Thank you. Welcome. Nice to see you, meet you finally. Hare Krishna. Okay. Text 43. Did that plug you in a little?
Yes.
Okay, good. The daughter of King Vidarbha accepted her husband all in all as the supreme. She gave up all sensual enjoyment and in complete renunciation followed the principles of her husband, who was so advanced. Thus she remained engaged in his service. So he went to the forest at the end. That's what kings do if they're real kings, rather than hold on and take everybody with them. Purport. Figuratively, King Malayadwaj is the spiritual master, and his wife Vaidarbhi is the disciple. The disciple accepts the spiritual master as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. As stated by Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur in the Guru Ashtaka, Sakshat Darit Twena. One directly accepts the Guru, the spiritual master, as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. One should accept the spiritual master not in the sense that the Mayavadi philosophers do, but in the way recommended here. Since the spiritual master is the most confidential servant of the Lord, he should be treated exactly like the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The spiritual master should never be neglected or disobeyed like an ordinary person. If a woman is fortunate enough to be the wife of a pure devotee, she can serve her husband without any desire for sense gratification. If she remains engaged in the service of her exalted husband, she will automatically attain the spiritual perfections of her husband. If a disciple gets a bona fide spiritual master, simply by satisfying him, he can attain a similar opportunity to serve the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Text 44. The daughter of King Vidarbha wore old garments, and she was lean and thin because of her vows of austerity. Since she did not arrange her hair, it became entangled and twisted in locks. Although she remained always near her husband, she was as silent and unagitated as a flame of an undisturbed fire. Purport. When one begins to burn firewood, there is smoke and agitation in the beginning. Although there are so many disturbances in the beginning, once the fire is completely set, the firewood burns steadily. Similarly, when both husband and wife follow the regulated principles of austerity, they remain silent and are not agitated by sex impulses. At such a time, both husband and wife are benefited spiritually. One can attain this stage of life by completely giving up a luxurious mode of life. In this verse, the word chiravasa refers to very old, torn garments. The wife especially should remain austere, not desiring luxurious dresses and living standards. She should accept only the bare necessities of life and minimize her eating and sleeping. This means when the wife follows the husband to the forest, not that they should do that when they're at home. That would cause some problems. There should be no question of mating. Simply by engaging in the service of her exalted husband, who must be a pure devotee, the wife will never be agitated by sex impulses. The Vanaprastha stage is exactly like this. Although the wife remains with the husband, she undergoes severe austerities and penances, so that although both husband and wife live together, there is no question of sex. In this way, both husband and wife can live together perpetually. Since the wife is weaker than the husband, this weakness is expressed in this verse with the words upapitim. Upa means near to, or almost equal to. Being a man, the husband is generally more advanced than his wife. Nonetheless, the wife is expected to give up all luxurious habits. She should not even dress nicely or comb her hair. Hair combing is one of the main businesses of women and men. In the Vanaprastha, in Kali Yuga, in the Vanaprastha stage, especially, in the Vanaprastha stage, the wife should not take care of her hair, thus her hair will become tangled in knots. Consequently, the wife will no longer be attractive to the husband, and she herself will no longer be agitated by sex impulses. In this way, both husband and wife can advance in spiritual consciousness. This advanced stage is called the Paramahansa stage. And once it is obtained, both husband and wife can be actually liberated from bodily consciousness. If the disciple remains steady in the service of the spiritual master, he need no longer fear falling down into the clutches of Maya. Text 45. What text?
45.
It's testing. Translation. The daughter of King Vidarbha continued as usual to serve her husband, who was seated in a steady posture until she could ascertain that he had passed away from the body. Purport. It appears that the queen did not even talk to her husband while serving. She would simply perform her prescribed duties without talk. Thus she did not stop rendering service until she could ascertain that her husband had passed from the body. Text 46. While she was serving her husband by massaging his legs, she could feel that his feet were no longer warm and could thus understand that he had already passed from the body. She felt great anxiety upon being left alone. Bereft of her husband's company, she felt exactly as the deer feels upon being separated from its mate. Purport. As soon as the circulation of blood and air within the body stops, it is to be understood that the soul within the body has left. The stoppage of the blood circulation is perceived when the hands and feet lose heat. One tests whether a body is alive or not by feeling the heart's palpitations and the coldness of the feet and hands. Text 47. Being now alone and a widow in that forest, the daughter of Vidarbha began to lament, incessantly shedding tears which soaked her breasts and crying very loudly. Purport. Figuratively, the queen is supposed to be the disciple of the king. Thus, when the mortal body of the spiritual master expires, his disciples should cry exactly as the queen cries when the king leaves his body. However, the disciple and spiritual master are never separated, because the spiritual master always keeps company with the disciple as long as the disciple follows strictly the instructions of the spiritual master. This is called the association of vani, words. Physical presence is called vapu. As long as the spiritual master is physically present, the disciple should serve the physical body of the spiritual master, and when the spiritual master is no longer physically existing, the disciple should serve the instructions of the spiritual master. Text 48. O best of kings, please get up, get up. Just see this world surrounded by water and infested with rogues and so-called kings. This world is very much afraid, and it is your duty to protect her. Purport. Whenever an acharya comes, following the superior orders of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, or his representative, he establishes the principles of religion, as enunciated in Bhagavad Gita. Religion means abiding by the orders of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Religious principles begin from the time one surrenders to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It is the Acharya's duty to spread a bona fide religious system and induce everyone to bow down before the Supreme Lord. One executes the religious principles by rendering devotional service, specifically the 9 items like hearing, chanting, and remembering. Unfortunately, when the Acharya disappears, rogues and non-devotees take advantage and immediately begin to introduce unauthorized principles in the name of so-called swamis, yogis, philanthropists, welfare workers, and so on. Actually, human life is meant for executing the orders of the Supreme Lord. And this is stated in Bhagavad Gita 9:34. Manmana bhavamad bhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru mami vaishyaisi yuktvaibam atmanam matparayanaha. Engage your mind always in thinking of me and become my devotee. Offer obeisances and worship me. Being completely absorbed in me, surely you will come to me. The main business of human society is to think of the Supreme Personality of Godhead at all times, to become his devotee, to worship the Supreme Lord, and to bow down before him. The Acharya, the authorized representative of the Supreme Lord, establishes these principles, but when he disappears, things once again become disordered. The perfect disciples of the Acharya try to relieve the situation by sincerely following the instructions of the spiritual master. At the present moment, practically the entire world is afraid of rogues and non-devotees. Therefore, this Krishna consciousness movement is started to save the world from irreligious principles. Everyone should cooperate with this movement in order to bring about actual peace and happiness in the world. Text 49. That most obedient wife thus fell down at the feet of her dead husband and began to cry pitifully in that solitary forest. Thus the tears rolled down from her eyes. Purport. Just as a devoted wife becomes afflicted at the passing away of her husband, when a spiritual master passes away, the disciple becomes similarly bereaved. Text 50. She then prepared a blazing fire with firewood and placed the dead body of her husband upon it. When this was finished, she lamented severely and prepared herself to perish in the fire with her husband. Purport. It is a long-standing tradition of the Vedic system that a faithful wife dies along with her husband. This is called sahamarana. In India, this system was prevalent even to the date of British occupation. At that time, however, a wife who did not wish to die with her husband was sometimes forced to do so by her relatives. Formerly, that was not the case. The wife used to enter the fire voluntarily. the British government stopped this practice, considering it inhuman. However, from the early history of India, we find that when Maharaj Pandu died, he was survived by 2 wives, Madri and Kunti. The question was whether both should die or one should die. After the death of Maharaj Pandu, his wives settled that one should remain and the other should go. Madri would perish with her husband in the fire, and Kunti would remain to take charge of the 5 Pandava children. Even as late as 1936, we saw a devoted wife voluntarily enter the fire of her husband. This indicates that a devotee's wife must be prepared to act in such a way. Similarly, a devoted disciple of the spiritual master would rather die with the spiritual master than fail to execute the spiritual master's mission. As the Supreme Personality of Godhead comes down upon this earth to re-establish the principles of religion, so his representative, the spiritual master, also comes to re-establish religious principles. It is the duty of the disciples to take charge of the mission of the spiritual master and execute it properly. Otherwise, the disciple should decide to die along with the spiritual master. In other words, to execute the will of the spiritual master, the disciple should be prepared to lay down his life and abandon all personal considerations. Text 51. My dear king, one Brahmana, who was an old friend of King Puranjana, came to that place and began to pacify the queen with sweet words. Purport. The appearance of an old friend in the form of a Brahmana is very significant. In his Paramatma feature, Krishna is the old friend of everyone. According to Vedic injunction, Krishna is sitting within the living entity, side by side. According to the Shruti mantra, Dva Suparna Yayuja Sakaya. The Lord is sitting within the heart of every living entity as Surit, the best friend. The Lord is always eager to have the living entity come home, back to Godhead. Sitting with the living entity as witness, the Lord gives him all chances to enjoy himself materially, but whenever there is an opportunity, the Lord gives good counsel and advises the living entity to abandon trying to become happy through material adjustment, and instead turn his face toward the Supreme Personality of Godhead and surrender unto Him. When one becomes serious to follow the mission of the spiritual master, his resolution is tantamount to seeing the Supreme Personality of Godhead. As explained before, this means meeting the Supreme Personality of Godhead in the instruction of the spiritual master. This is technically called Vani Seva. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur states in his Bhagavad Gita commentary on the verse Vyavasayatmika Buddhir Ekeha Kudunandana 241 that one should serve the words of the spiritual master. The disciple must stick to whatever the spiritual master orders. Simply by following on that line, one sees the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Paramatma, appears before the queen as a Brahmana. But why didn't he appear in his original form as Sri Krishna? Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur remarks that unless one is very highly elevated in loving the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one cannot see him as he is. Nonetheless, if one sticks to the principles enunciated by the spiritual master, somehow or other he is in association with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Since the Lord is in the heart, he can advise a sincere disciple from within. This is also confirmed in Bhagavad Gita 10.10. Tesham satati yuktanam bhajatam priti purvakam dadami buddhi yogam tam yenamam upayanti te. To those who are constantly devoted and worship me with love, I give the understanding by which they can come to me. In conclusion, if a disciple is very serious to execute the mission of the spiritual master, he immediately associates with the Supreme Personality of Godhead by Vani or Vapu. This is the only secret of success in seeing the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Instead of being eager to see the Lord in some bush of Vrindavan, while at the same time engaging in sense gratification, if one instead sticks to the principle of following the words of the spiritual master, he will see the Supreme Lord without difficulty. Srila Bilbha Thakur has therefore said, Bhaktis tvayi sthiratarata bhagavan yadi syad daivena nak pralati divya kishori mortihi mukti swayam mukulichanjila sevate sman dharmartha kamagatayak samaya pratikshaha. If I am engaged in devotional service unto you, my dear Lord, then very easily I can perceive your presence everywhere. As far as liberation is concerned, I think that liberation stands at my door with folded hands, waiting to serve me, and all material conveniences of dharma, religiosity, artha, economic development, and kama, sense gratification, stand with her. Krishna Karnamrita 107. If one is very highly advanced in devotional service, he will have no difficulty in seeing the Supreme Personality of Godhead. If one engages in the service of the spiritual master, he not only sees the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but attains liberation. As far as material conveniences are concerned, they automatically come, just as the maidservants of a queen follow the queen wherever she goes. Liberation is no problem for the pure devotee, and all material conveniences are simply awaiting him at all stages of life. Text 52. The Brahmana inquired as follows: Who are you? Whose wife or daughter are you? Who is the man lying here? It appears you are lamenting for this dead body. Don't you recognize me? I am your eternal friend. You may remember that many times in the past you have consulted me. Purport. When a person's relative dies, renunciation is automatically visible. Consultation with the Supersoul seated within everyone's heart is possible only when one is completely free from the contamination of material attachment. One who is sincere and pure gets an opportunity to consult with the Supreme Personality of Godhead in his Paramatma feature, sitting within everyone's heart. The Paramatma is always the Chaitya Guru, the spiritual master within. He comes before one externally as the instructor and initiator, spiritual master. The Lord can reside within the heart, and he can also come out before a person and give him instructions. Thus the spiritual master is not different from the Supersoul sitting in the heart. An uncontaminated soul or living entity can get a chance to meet the Paramatma face to face, just as one gets a chance to consult with the Paramatma within his heart. He also gets a chance to see him actually situated before him. Then one can take instructions from the Supersoul directly. This is the duty of the pure devotee, to see the bona fide spiritual master and consult with the Supersoul within the heart. When the Brahmana asked the woman who the man lying on the floor was, she answered that he was her spiritual master and that she was perplexed about what to do in his absence. At such a time, the Supersoul immediately appears, provided the devotee is purified in heart by following the directions of the spiritual master. A sincere devotee who follows the instructions of the spiritual master certainly gets direct instructions from his heart, from the Supersoul. Thus, a sincere devotee is always helped directly or indirectly by the spiritual master and the Supersoul. This is confirmed in Chaitanya Charitamrita, Guru Krishna Prasadi Poya, Bhakti Lata Bij. If the devotee serves his spiritual master sincerely, Krishna automatically becomes pleased. Yasya prasadat bhagavat prasada. By satisfying the spiritual master, one automatically satisfies Krishna. Thus the devotee becomes enriched by both the spiritual master and Krishna. The Supersoul is eternally the friend of the living entity and always remains with him. The Supersoul has always been ready to help the living entity even before the creation of this material world. It is therefore stated here, Inagre Vichidata. The word agre means before the creation. Thus the Supersoul has been accompanying the living entity since before the creation. Text 53. The Brahmana continued, My dear friend, even though you cannot immediately recognize me, can't you remember that in the past you had a very intimate friend? Unfortunately, you gave up my company and accepted a position as enjoyer of this material world. Purport. As stated in Bhagavad Gita 7:27, Ichcha dvesha samutina dvandva mohina bharata sarvabhutani samoham sargiyanti parantapa. O scion of Bharata, Arjuna, O conqueror of the foe, all living entities are born into delusion, overcome by the dualities of desire and hate. This is an explanation of how the living entity falls down into this material world. In the spiritual world, there is no duality, nor is there hate. The Supreme Personality of Godhead expands himself into many in order to enjoy bliss more and more. The Supreme Lord expands himself in different categories. As mentioned in the Varaha Purana, he expands himself in Vishnu Tattva, the Swamsha expansion, and in his marginal potency, the Vibhinangsha, or the living entity. These expanded living entities are innumerable, just as the minute molecules of sunshine are innumerable expansions of the sun. The Vibhinangsha expansions, the marginal potencies of the Lord, are the living entities. When the living entities desire to enjoy themselves, they develop a consciousness of duality and come to hate the service of the Lord. In this way, the living entities fall into the material world. In the Prema Vivarta, it is said, Krishna bahir mukkahaya bhoga vanchakari nikatasta maya tari japitiya dari. The natural position of the living entity is to serve the Lord in transcendental loving service attitude. When the living entity wants to become Krishna himself or imitate Krishna, he falls down into the material world. Since Krishna is the Supreme Father, his affection for the living entity is eternal. When the living entity falls down into the material world, the Supreme Lord, through his Swangsha expansion, Paramatma, keeps company with the living entity. In this way, the living entity may someday return home, back to Godhead. By misusing his independence, the living entity falls down from the service of the Lord and takes a position in this material world as an enjoyer. That is to say, the living entity takes his position within a material body. Wanting to take a very exalted position, the living entity instead becomes entangled in a repetition of birth and death. He selects his position as a human being, a demigod, a cat, a dog, a tree, etc. In this way, the living entity selects a body out of the 8,400,000 forms and tries to satisfy himself by a variety of material enjoyment. The Supersoul, however, does not like him to do this. Consequently, the Supersoul instructs him to surrender unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Lord then takes charge of the living entity, but unless the living entity is uncontaminated by material desires, he cannot surrender to the Supreme Lord. In Bhagavad Gita 5:29, the Lord says, Bhoktaram Yagyatapasam Sarvaloka Maheshwaram Suridam Sarvabhutanam Gyatva Mam Shantimrichati. The sages, knowing me as the ultimate purpose of all sacrifices and austerities, the supreme lord of all the planets and demigods, and the benefactor and well-wisher of all living entities, attains peace from the pangs of material miseries. The Supreme Lord is the supreme friend of everyone. However, no one can take advantage of the Supreme Friend's instructions while making his own plans to become happy and entangling himself in the modes of material nature. When there is a creation, the living entities take on different forms according to past desires. This means that all the species or forms of life are simultaneously created. Darwin's theory, stating that no human being existed from the beginning, but that humans evolved after many, many years, is simply a nonsensical theory. From Vedic literature, we find that the first creature within the universe is Lord Brahma. Being the most intelligent personality, Lord Brahma could take charge of creating all the variety found within this material world. So, in that regard, there's a scientific principle that is a law of nature that can never be broken. And that is, if a form is the source of another form, then that form, the created form, cannot have more information content than the source form. You know, it's pure, unbreakable logic and truth that if a form creates another form, that created form cannot have more information content that is contained in the form, because it's the information content within that form that allows that created form to have its form. So if you apply that logic, that pure scientific logic, not sentiment, not but logic, science, spiritual science, you'll see that the source of everything, which is God, must contain all the information that it needed to create the whole universe, including all the forms. It's not that there was one point and then it exploded and then all of this came into be by random combination of the particles. It's complete gibberish. Or as they say in English, gobbledygook. Maybe they say that in America too. That's an Indian phrase, gobbledygook. Therefore, sometimes they have a saying in England, when something happens that just bewilders them, they go, I'm gobsmacked. Anybody that thinks that we came from a cell is gobsmacked. Text 54, not godsmacked, gobsmacked. Text 54, that's right, exactly. Text 54. So this is the basis of real faith and real spiritual strength. Knowledge, not blind following, not just sentiment. The knowledge that you get from the spiritual master and from the Shastra, the scriptures, must allow you to see the world. It must be confirmed with what you see in the world and what you experience in the world, what the truths are in the scripture. Otherwise, somebody's been fiddling with it. And needless to say, there are lots of things that have been fiddled with in the name of spiritual knowledge in this world today. Text 54. My dear gentle friend, both you and I are exactly like two swans. We live together in the same heart, which is just like the Manasa lake. Although we have been living together for many thousands of years, we are still far away from our original home. Purport. The original home of the living entity and the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the spiritual world. In the spiritual world, both the Lord and the living entities live together very peacefully. Since the living entity remains engaged in the service of the Lord, they both share a blissful life in the spiritual world. However, when the living entity wants to enjoy himself, he falls down into the material world. Even while he is in that position, the Lord remains with him as the Supersoul, his intimate friend. Because of his forgetfulness, the living entity does not know that the Supreme Lord is accompanying him as the Supersoul. In this way, the living entity remains conditioned in each and every millennium. Although the Lord follows him as a friend, the living entity, because of forgetful material existence, does not recognize him. Text 55. My dear friend, you are now my very same friend. Since you left me, you have become more and more materialistic. And not seeing me, you have been traveling in different forms throughout this material world, which was created by some woman. Purport. When the living entity falls down, he goes into the material world, which was created by the external energy of the Lord. This external energy is described herein as some woman or Prakriti. This material world is composed of material elements, ingredients, supplied by the Mahat Tattva, the total material energy. The material world, created by this external energy, becomes the so-called home of the conditioned soul. Within this material world, the conditioned soul accepts different apartments or different bodily forms and then travels about. Sometimes he travels in the higher planetary systems and sometimes in the lower systems. Sometimes he travels in the higher species of life and sometimes in lower species. He has been wandering within this material world universe since time immemorial, as explained by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Brahmanda Brahmite kon Bhagyavan Jeev Guru Krishna Prasadi Poi Bhakti Lata Bij. The living entity wanders into many species of life, but he is fortunate when he once again meets his friend, either in person or through his representative. Actually, it is Krishna who personally advises all living entities to return back home, back to Godhead. Sometimes Krishna sends his representative, who, delivering Krishna's very message, canvasses all living entities to return home, back to Godhead. Unfortunately, the living entity is so greatly attached to material enjoyment that he does not take the instructions of Krishna or his representative very seriously. This material tendency is mentioned in this verse as gramya mati, sense gratification. The word mahim means within this material world. All living entities within this material world are sensually inclined. Consequently, they become entangled in different types of bodies and suffer the pangs of material existence. Text 56. In that city, the material body, there are 5 gardens, 9 gates, 1 protector, 3 apartments, 6 families, 5 stories, 5 material elements, and 1 woman who is Lord of the house. So I'm going to stop the reading there tonight, but I want to say one thing before we make the open mic. That is our new, handle for this time that we spend, open mic. But I want to say that, I don't know if because there's some regulars here. The new persons who came here tonight are not ordinary. I'm telling you, they're not ordinary. Because this section was so different than the readings have been up until tonight. Is it true? Mm-hmm. Completely different. The basics of Krishna conscious philosophy were just lined out in a way that a new person, it was like built for you. It was like written down for you. It was true. It's really true. I'm not just making it up. It's really true. And therefore, we who are reading it through and seeing this for ourselves, how Krishna just appears and the instructions just appear just exactly with what we need to hear. We've had regulars here who have been hearing for a long time, and we've been hearing some heavy things about the material nature and man and woman and illusion and birth and death and the futility of material existence and all these things, it was like we needed some lightening up. And all of a sudden you guys came in, and then, Prabhupada just went and give us the whole basic philosophy of Krishna consciousness in just a few minutes. So thanks for showing up. Hare Krishna. Okay, here it is. Open mic. This means if something that you heard stuck in your mind and you want to either reflect on it or inquire something more or have more discussion about it, right? Or if you would just want to sit there and listen, that's fine too. You don't have to feel pressured that now I'm holding out a mic and saying, we don't have enough time for everybody to speak anyway. So this is it. Questions, comments, reflections, discussions. Here it is, folks. Nitya.
Not the mic.
Nitya. No, she'll never do.
No, I just remember when you said you were sick and you see that old man.
Show it. Yeah, you have to. Break her. Yeah, show the camera. Break your silence.
You said when you were very sick and you almost passed out, then you saw that old man came and said, "Go."
Oh yeah, you remember that.
So it sounds like the old man that the queen saw.
Anyway, thank you for the blessing. It was remembering a story I told not too long ago, a few days ago, about how I had a very, very high fever, because the purport said that when a person goes to 107 temperature, that's it, you're out. There's a word for it in Sanskrit, jwala, shiv jwara, or something like that. And I asked everybody what was the highest fever they had, and I don't think anybody came up to 105, and I had 105. And so I said, "Well, you weren't there that day, were you? Were you there? Were you there when we talked about it? No. So you weren't there, therefore no one else had it in 105. But I went to 106.2. I had a kind of infection when I was in Spain, very heavy urinary tract infection, and it was really heavy. Anyway, I won't go through the details of it, but it was when I got to the peak of that fever, just before it broke, I had a kind of like almost hallucination, like a vision. It was different than a dream. It was far out, and he was standing in front of a little, curtain, and he came over and he said, "Come chant over here," because I was chanting all the time, trying to keep my mind fixed on Krishna in that very difficult situation. And I went over there and I started to chant, and then he opened the curtain, and there was this beautiful idyllic lake and swans and overhanging branches with flowers and lotus flowers, beautiful. And I just, okay, this is good. So I just went in there and started chanting, and then the fever broke. Yeah. So that was 1980 something, 83, 84, something like that. So yeah, it's true. Krishna is there, and he's always protecting us, and he's always giving us direction. And sometimes we listen, and most of the time we don't. And that's how we got ourselves in trouble. We stop listening. Okay, it's called conscience.
What is the Manasa Lake?
Well, there, it's a figurative, it's an allegorical story, because the Manasa Lake is a very famous spiritual lake in India, in a holy place, that was created by the tears of the Lord. Yes. And Manasa means mind, and the place was made very, very sanctified by the tears of the Lord. And therefore it's called Manasa Lake. And therefore in the story it uses that image to describe the peacefulness of that situation. Yes. Jorge. Back from Dallas.
I guess this question gets brought up a lot, and it can be sometimes a little bit controversial. Prabhupada said that we don't fall down from the spiritual world, but we're reading also that when we want to enjoy outside of Krishna, then we fall down. So I've kind of heard many devotees' different take on this, is that we never fall down, but at the same time, I guess it's our choice to fall down. So I don't know if I have a correct understanding of it.
Okay, you said when you first started, Prabhupada told us that that no one falls down from the spiritual world. Yes. That's one sentence out of how many sentences did Prabhupada speak? Hundreds of thousands, maybe even 1 million. If you take that one sentence and make it absolute, there's many, many places where Prabhupada says that we did come from the spiritual world. So Prabhupada's take on this, when someone confronted him directly, and you can look it up, there's a letter that he wrote. It's called the Crow and Tall Fruit Logic Letter. You just look it up in the database, Crow and Tall Fruit Logic. And then he will give you a 3 or 4 page letter which describes everything about it. And he never takes the side absolutely, one side or the other. And he says, if you take it as a controversy and try to figure it out in your mind, then you will just be confused. And therefore he says, it's not worth the effort. It's a waste of time to speculate about it. It's inconceivable. It's beyond our capacity to understand from here, from the material existence within time and space. Because the spiritual world is without time and space. There is no time in the spiritual world. You can't say when something happened. Period. So if you try to analyze from here in the material world, where we're in time and space, where everything has a beginning and an end and a time and you try to conceive of that, and try to reconcile this, you will simply keep on forgetting Krishna. You won't be able to love Krishna because you're always trying to figure out, is this true or that true? Or is this true? Therefore, generally speaking, issues like this are a waste of time for a devotee. That was Prabhupada's take on this subject. You can find things where Prabhupada clearly said we came from the spiritual world. It says right here in this purport we just read. Nitya Siddhi Krishna Prema Sabukabunoi. Nitya Siddhi Krishna Prema Sabukabunoi. That love for Krishna, that's prema. It's sometimes written bhakti, sometimes prema, but it means love for Krishna is there in the heart of every living being. And we've forgotten it because we're very tiny, and at the same time we've been given, because we're part of Krishna, we've been given a part of Krishna's qualities. Krishna is completely independent, and we are minutely independent. Independence means that there's an opportunity to use it properly or to misuse it properly. That's what independence means. Without that conception, there is no meaning to independence. So you can say there's only one thing that the Shastras say absolutely, and that is we came here by the misuse of our minute independence. That's all you can say. Where you came from, how you came, when you came, you can't say. It can't be traced out. I can point you to 1,000 times when Prabhupada said that. Cannot be traced out. So why are you boiling your brain about it? Why are you worrying about it? That was Prabhupada's approach. And you'll never find any place in any Shastra that has a kind of mechanistic or reductionistic analysis that comes to an absolute statement, one or the other. Doesn't exist. Not even Jiva Goswami, not even Bhaktivinoda Thakur. That's as close as I can get. Because I'm a conditioned soul in this material world. And you can't see it directly. Therefore you can't understand it. When you go back to Godhead, then you'll understand. One time Prabhupada was asked the question, why is Krishna blue? Bluish black. And Prabhupada said, why don't you ask him? Because it's so obvious. There's certain things that you can't figure out from here. And therefore you got to go there and then you'll understand. But this thought, the train of thought that is controversial and doesn't allow you, to your mind, to be peaceful and to go to Krishna, to want to go back, it prevents you from doing it. It's a very subtle trick of Maya. Very subtle trick of Maya. This is controversial. There's some people who say this, and there's some people who say that. Great. So come back as a Muni, and then you can argue yourself till you're sick, until you die again. And then you come back and argue again. And then you come back and argue again. Because you can't surrender to Krishna like that. You can't surrender to Krishna by grabbing hold of a controversy and, embracing it. There's a class of person in the world now. They're called conspiracy theorists. Right? They got some conspiracy theory. There's a cadre of very rich people, and they're controlling everybody, even the politicians and everything. And there's some that say that it's all conspiracy theory. The U.S. did it. They did it. The Saudis did it. This did that. And then people are just talking all about this. Yeah, they did it. No, they did it. No, they did it. In that tall and crow and tall flute logic, Prabhupada tells the story. So there's two Brahmins, and they're sitting in front on the base of a tree. It's a tall fruit palm tree, and there was a crow on top of the tree, and all of a sudden the crow fell. There's a fruit fell, and the crow flew away. So one guy says, "Oh, the crow, when he flew away, it broke the fruit, and the fruit fell down." He said, No. The fruit fell down and scared the fly away, the crow away. And they went on and on and on about this. So then a devotee came along, and he watched, and they were going back and forth, and he looked at the fruit on the ground. He picked up the fruit and walked away. Come to the light. The truth will set you free. Most people who get into these controversies, they find a train of thought that they think that's the answer, and then because it's controversial, they act in such a way as to think that everybody has to come to them to get the answer. That means they're prematurely wanting to be guru without surrendering to Krishna. Is that something? Hare Krishna.
Is that use or misuse of independence? Is it like, are the two energies perfectly imbalanced, or is like is like Maya stronger, or is
We are marginal potency. There's many categories of Krishna's energies, many, unlimited, but they are divided into three categories for our understanding, to make it easier for us to understand. It's the internal energy, the external energy, and the marginal energy. The internal energy is Krishna and his and the spiritual world. Spiritual world is made up of internal energy. The living being, and the external energy is Krishna's external energy, and it is Krishna's energy. It's coming from Krishna, so ultimately it's spiritual, but by his will it's acting like it's inert. And the marginal energy is also internal energy, but very tiny. And because it's tiny, it has the tendency to be able to identify with either the internal or the external energy. The external energy doesn't have the choice to choose because it's inert. The marginal energy is internal energy, but it's minute, infinitesimal. Krishna is infinite. We're a part of God, a part of Krishna, and we are infinitesimal. Therefore, because of that smallness, we have a tendency, there's a tendency in us to choose. But most don't. Most don't choose to go to the material world. Only a few of us have come here. Imagine how big the spiritual world is. We're living in one universe. The universe is 4 billion miles in diameter. Millions of planets, billions of planets. There's life in all of them. What to speak of the Earth? How many insects are there in the walls of this room? Who knows? How many microbes are there in the tip of our finger? Million? Billion? Every one a living entity. So that tiny living entity, because of its tininess, has the tendency to misuse its independence and be attracted to the material energy. But only a few do. And that's the truth. That's the reality. Otherwise, if you don't accept this philosophy, then you will naturally, when you follow it to the conclusion, it'll be God's fault. If I didn't choose, but I'm here and I'm suffering, then it must be God's fault. I'm not going to be God. That's the root of atheistic philosophy.
Thank you. But my question is still unanswered. Maybe it's just my not understanding. So, that
because you're a conspiracy theorist. Go ahead.
Am I? I didn't know.
What do you mean? Keep on talking. We'll find out.
So, my question is, I have two questions. From our position, the external energy is stronger than the internal energy? Is my first question.
It's bigger than the infinitesimal part
Okay.
of the internal energy.
But those two energies, the internal and external, are they balanced? And it's just up to us whether we pick one or the other? That's
It's not
why.
a matter of balance. It's a matter of the size. It's a matter of the infinitesimal size of the spirit soul in relationship to the total material energy. The total material energy and the total spiritual energy are also the total material energy and the total spiritual energy are both unlimitedly greater than the infinitesimal spirit soul who's a part of God.
But is one greater than the other?
I don't know what it's a nonsense question. You can't understand something by asking a nonsense question. It's all Krishna's energy. You want to say it's different. You want to say one's better than the other. It's different. It's superior. The material energy is superior to the material energy because it's conscious. The internal energy is superior to the material energy because it's conscious. And the material energy is not conscious. But Krishna can make it conscious. Because it's coming from Krishna. Krishna is the source of everything. This answers the duality of what people say. Why is it that bad things happen to good people? And this is the doubt, the fundamental existential doubt that doesn't allow a person to surrender to God or to think that God is all good. The material world exists because we, as the conditioned souls, wanted to live separately from Krishna. So in order for us to do that, Krishna had to make a material world so that we could do that. That's his love for us. Like the sun shines down on the water and creates a cloud. And the cloud covers us from seeing the sun. The cause of that covering for our inability to see the sun is the sun itself. So the cause of us not being able to see God is God himself. But that doesn't mean it's God's fault. We wanted to come here. The soul is infinitesimally independent. Infinitesimally independent, yes. So we can choose to be with the material or spirituality. So now I want you to say, well, they are imbalanced? Or how do I, this is all material conception. You want to put it on put it into a geometry class or something and figure it out like that. You can't. It's a different laws of nature. Spiritual world has different laws of nature. In the spiritual world, 1 minus 1 is equal to 1. In the material world, 1 minus 1 is equal to 0. So therefore you can't understand the spiritual world by using material logic and figuring it out for yourself. Yes.
Well,
Chris.
What I understand about what she's saying is, it looks like we have free will, and somehow we have the option to go to the spiritual or the material. Why we choose the material?
No, it's not like that. It's not like that.
No?
What you're saying is your conception is wrong. Your conception is we started here and we were in no place. And therefore we had to choose one or the other. So why we choose the material energy? But it's not like that. The spiritual soul, whether the spiritual soul came from the pastimes of Krishna in the spiritual world or came from the spiritual sky of the spiritual world, where some souls also exist in the spiritual sky without a form, without activity, they just exist in eternity. It's like a waiting list. They're all, there's a soul in all the, in the Brahma Jyoti, and there's a waiting list waiting to come to the material world to get their form so they can act, so that they can go back to the spiritual world. So it requires material logic to come to a conclusion, either way or the other. But it's not, you can't use material logic. We are spiritual. We had a relationship with Krishna, a loving relationship with Krishna. It's existing eternally in us. And why we chose to, I'll give you an example. Nowadays, when I was growing up, you could go into an airplane and people smoked on the airplane. And some airlines were so crazy that they had the smoking and non-smoking, everybody was mixed. And then everybody kind of got really upset. So then they made a non-smoking section. I don't remember if it was in the back or the front. Anyway, it was one of them. This is probably before your time, most of you. And at one point, they decided, no smoking. And now you cannot go in an airplane and smoke. And yet you'll see an ashtray in the bathroom. And then they'll see a sign. If you smoke and put ashes in this, then you're in trouble. You're getting arrested. So then, the next stage was they had to put on the advertising on the package that it was dangerous for you. And now, I don't know if you know this, but in England, they have to put a full bleed picture on the cigarette package. Gory picture, like some kind of... smoking kills, and maybe even with some gory, person all like this, whatever, with the, open tumor, or, some kind of really heavy things. That's where it's going. And what do? They smoke anyway. That is the inconceivable nature of the soul. Try to understand. God's inconceivable unlimitedly, and the soul is inconceivable limitedly. And that's the reason why they can choose to come to the material world. And there's no other reason for it, and there's no other way to figure it out. And you may hear some so-called spiritualists say, unless you accept it this way, you can't go a step forward in spiritual life. Oh, it's bogus. You'll never hear that in the scripture. You'll never read that in the scripture. Therefore, it's up to us to hear the scripture and learn it at least to the point where you understand what gold is. Because if you go out looking for gold and you have the foggiest idea what it looks like or how to test it, whether it is, then somebody's going to sell you a box of cornflakes for $65,000, or $1 million, whatever a box of gold flakes would cost, and you'll get cheated. So it's up to you. If you're looking for gold, it's up to you to find out what gold looks like and what it is, and how to test it. Yeah. So if everybody's saying, can you show me God? Really? What kind of eyes do you have to see God? Do you have the eyes? If I showed it, here he is, would you be able to see him? No.
You have to experience it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Experience it.
But how do you experience it?
Exactly.
He has to choose you. How will he choose you? If you become attractive to him. So there's all kinds of instructions to Krishna in Bhagavad Gita and Srimad-Bhagavatam, Chaitanya Charitamrita, unlimited instructions for Krishna. What you should do, how you should be, how you should act, how you should think, how you should feel, how you should will, how you should act, in order to please him. Hand me that Gita. You want to please him? Here it is. Conclusion of the Gita, 18th chapter, 68, 69th verse. Right here. He says, Ya idam padamam guyam. Sorry. Ya idam padamam guyam. Mad bhakti shabidasyati. Bhaktim mayi param kritva. Mam ebaishat yasangshayaha. For one who explains this supreme secret to the devotees, pure devotional service is guaranteed, and at the end, he will come back to me. Nachatasman manusheshu kaschin me priyakritama bhavita nachame tasmad anyak priyataro bhuvi. There is no servant in this world more dear to me than he, nor will there ever be one more dear. So you want to come back to Godhead? You come over here, you sit right here, and you become qualified to do this. And then you can go back to Godhead. And you'll become completely happy, no matter what your body's doing, no matter what's going on in the world. Because just like that friend that was talking about in this section, Krishna will be there in your heart, and even if you can't perceive directly and the form and hear the words, he will give you everything. I haven't had a job in 50 years. 50 years, count them. I travel 1, 2, 3, 4 times a year around the world. You know, I'm using this. Whatever, it's uncanny. Isn't it? Or you can work your butt off for it and get it or not, and mostly not. Take your choice. We got a realization from this cyberspace. Okay. We got about, well, there's 3,350 followers. Not all of them are out there watching now, but a few of them are.
Vijaya Lakshmi says, Hare Krishna Maharaj, if I may add, the different species are made in this material world to help us to go back to Krishna according to our karma, past and present. Even though we chose the material world, Krishna's love is so great that he gives us a chance to come back to him.
Well, not only that, but he goes with us. Wherever we go and whatever body we take, he's there with us. That's the whole point of that section of the Bhagavatam we just read. That Brahmana comes to the Vidarbhi's what the queen of Vidarbhi, and says, "Don't you remember?" He comes with us. He's in our hearts, and wherever we go, we're in the bottle of a worm, in the body of a demigod, body of a man or a woman, human, dog or cat, alligator, rattlesnake, whatever body we decide to try, he's there with us, watching us and waiting, just waiting patiently. That's called Surit. Suridam. Su-rit. Rit means heart. Su means good. There's different kinds of friends. Maitri is a friend that's just kind of your friend, but is not there whatever you do. But Surit is your real friend, that whatever you do, they're still your friends. That's love. One of the definitions of love in Chaitanya Charitamrita is that if a person that you're in love with does something so outrageous that it's justifiable that you leave, and you don't. Hare Krishna. I got to stop now because I went 15 minutes over because I got to get up at 2 in the morning and record Chaitanya Charitamrita tomorrow morning, and I have to have the voice to do it. Thank you very much. Thank you three for coming. Hare Krishna. Thank you for coming. Hope we see you again. Thank you for giving shelter to our new bhaktin. And thanks all of you out in cyberspace. Srimad-Bhagavatam ki jai. Gaur Premanandi. Hari Hari Bol. Hare Krishna.